My name is Lillian Moore. I am 68 years old, a widow, and for most of my life, people have called me a farmer's wife or simply a farmer's widow. I tended the land, raised chickens, planted rows of soybeans, and kept a garden of roses that had been started by my grandmother. That land was my anchor, the last thread connecting me to my late husband and to the generations who came before us. But 3 weeks ago, in front of an entire town council, my own daughter looked me in the eye and called me a poor old woman after selling my farm behind my back. I still remember the hush that fell over the room. The air smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Folding chairs scraped as neighbors leaned forward, their eyes flicking between me and my daughter, Marissa. She stood at the podium in a crisp dress, her husband Ethan by her side with a phone raised high, live streaming the moment to an audience she thought would admire her. She was smiling, her voice practiced, rehearsed. She told the town that I had given her consent. She told them that selling our farm was an act of progress. And then, almost casually, she let the words slip. My mother is just a poor old woman. She deserves to rest while we take care of the future. The words pierced me sharper than any knife. I felt the weight of every season I had worked under the sun. My hand trembled slightly, but I steadied it by pressing my fingers against the piece of fabric I always carried. It was a lace handkerchief, worn soft with years, embroidered with my initials by my late husband. That little square of cloth has absorbed tears of joy and sorrow. It has witnessed births, funerals, storms, and harvests. Tonight, it caught the moment when my own child denied me dignity in public. I rose from the back row. The wooden floor creaked beneath me. Claire, my neighbor who had been sitting beside me, whispered, "Lillian, you don't have to do this." But I had to. For too long, I had chosen silence. For too long, I had allowed people to mistake gentleness for weakness. Every face turned toward me as I walked to the front. The light above the council table cast a pale glow on Marissa's confident smile. She froze when she saw me. Her voice faltered, the phone in Ethan's hand shaking slightly as he tried to keep streaming. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she asked. I held up the handkerchief, not like a weapon, but like a reminder. I looked at her, then at the council, then at the neighbors who had known me for decades. My voice was steady, even soft, but it cut through the silence. My daughter called me a poor old woman after stealing my land. What she does not know is that this poor woman is the silent owner of a $485 million company. The room fell into stunned stillness. Someone dropped a pen. Someone else gasped. I heard a chair scrape hard against the floor as a man stood to see me more clearly. Ethan lowered his phone, his face draining of color. Marissa's mouth opened, then closed again. She looked like a child caught in a lie, her confidence collapsing. I did not shout. I did not accuse with venom. I simply revealed the truth that I had guarded for decades. My life had never been about showing wealth. I had driven the same old truck, shopped at the discount store, cooked simple meals, and worn secondhand coats. Not because I had nothing, but because I never needed to prove anything. My work had been my proof. My husband and I had built more agritech with our own ideas, our own sacrifices, our own faith. Over the years, that company had grown into a quiet empire serving farmers across the world. But I had stayed in the same farmhouse, wearing the same boots, keeping the same soil under my nails. Now, in front of everyone who thought they knew me, I let the mask slip. I let them see what Marissa never bothered to ask about. And as I stood there, handkerchief in hand, I asked the only question that mattered. How does a daughter look at her mother, who gave her everything, and decide to strip away her last dignity? The answer hung in the silence. No one dared to speak. The weight of my words pressed against every heart in the room. For the first time, Marissa had no audience to cheer her on. She had no stage lights, no filters, only the truth. That night was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice, about reminding everyone, including myself, that silence can be powerful, but silence broken at the right moment is even more powerful. The town council, my neighbors, even strangers watching through Ethan's shaky live stream, all witnessed the turning of the tide. What happened next is a story I will tell you piece by piece. But I promise you this. From the moment I said those words, everything changed. After the town meeting, after the silence and the stares, my mind drifted back. To understand how my daughter could stand in front of our neighbors and call me a poor old woman, you have to go back a few months before my illness, when I was still strong enough to tend the roses and scatter feed for the hens. Spring had come late that year. The morning air was cool, the soil damp from overnight rain. I remember kneeling in the garden with the scent of roses surrounding me. My hands were dirty, my knees sore, but my heart was steady. Caring for the land always steadied me. I spoke softly to the hens as I opened their gate, the same way I had for decades. They clucked around me, and I smiled. Those small rhythms, watering the roses, collecting eggs, were what gave meaning to my days. Marissa arrived that afternoon. She wore new shoes that sank slightly in the mud, and she wrinkled her nose as if the earth itself offended her. "Mom, this place looks like a dump," she said, brushing a speck of dirt from her coat. Her voice was sharp, dismissive. She gestured at the chicken coop, its wood weathered but still sturdy. "It looks like some kind of broken shack. Honestly, I don't know how you live here." I paused, still holding the basket of eggs. My eyes met hers, but I said nothing. Inside me, a flicker of sadness mixed with something heavier. This farm had carried 4 generations. It had seen storms, droughts, and celebrations. To her, it was just an eyesore. Ethan followed behind her with his phone raised. He loved to broadcast his life, every meal, every outing, every opinion. That evening, as I set a roast on the table, he tapped the record button. "Dinner at the old farmhouse," he said into the camera, his tone mocking but coated with charm. "Back to the dark ages, folks. Look at this. Candles, no fancy appliances, no high-tech anything. Straight out of the past, I watched him through the steam rising from the roast." Marissa laughed beside him, adding, "My mom just doesn't get it. She's stuck in another century." Their words buzzed in the air, louder than the clinking of forks. They thought they were being clever. To me, it was like a slow drip of poison. I cut slices of meat, placed them gently on their plates, and poured iced tea into their glasses. My silence filled the room. It was not the silence of defeat, but of remembering. Every insult, every roll of the eye, every careless laugh etched itself into me. I tucked those moments away like thorns beneath the roses, small, sharp, easy to ignore until you press against them. After dinner, when they returned to their screens and their posts, I stepped outside. The night was cool, stars scattered above. I took out my lace handkerchief and pressed it to my lips. That cloth had comforted me when my husband died. It had dried tears after long harvest days. Tonight, it carried my quiet vow. I would not forget the way my daughter looked at me, nor the way my son-in-law turned our table into a stage for ridicule. The chickens rustled in their coop, the roses swayed in the breeze, and I stood still in the yard. In my silence, I was storing away more than memories. I was preparing myself. Because sometimes the greatest betrayals do not come all at once. They arrive in whispers, in glances, in careless words that plant seeds of contempt. By the time the storm hits, the roots have already grown deep. Looking back, I should have seen it then. The farm I treasured was never home to Marissa anymore. To her, it was a burden, a symbol of smallness she wanted to shed. To Ethan, it was a backdrop, useful only for the performance he staged online. And to me, it was life itself. That difference in value was the first fracture, the crack that widened into a chasm. I stood outside that night until the candles on the table had burned down and the laughter from inside had faded. I folded the handkerchief carefully and slipped it back into my pocket. I knew my silence would not last forever. One day, it would speak for me, and when it did, no mocking word, no careless insult would be able to drown it out. The night. The illness came. It arrived without warning. I had been outside trimming the rose bushes, the air still warm with the breath of summer. Suddenly, a sharp pain gripped my chest, radiating down my arm. The world tilted, colors blurred, and the shears fell from my hand into the soil. I tried to steady myself against the garden gate, but my knees gave way. The last sound I heard before everything went dim was the frantic clucking of the hens. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital. White walls, the steady beep of a monitor, the sterile smell that clung to everything. A nurse hovered above me, her voice calm yet urgent. "Mrs. Moore, you had a mild stroke. You're stable now, but we need to prepare for surgery." I lay there, disoriented, trying to grasp what had happened. My body felt heavy, my tongue thick. The thought that terrified me most was not my health but the land. Who would care for the chickens, the roses, the rows of beans? I had always been the keeper of that cycle. To leave it in someone else's hands felt like breaking a sacred promise. Marissa arrived later that evening, her perfume filling the sterile room before her voice did. "Mom, you scared us," she said, though her tone carried more annoyance than worry. Ethan followed behind her, tapping at his phone. His screen glowed even in the harsh hospital light. I tried to smile, tried to believe in the bond that once existed between us. I reached for the keys to the farmhouse, still in my purse on the side table. With trembling fingers, I pressed them into Marissa's hand. "Take care of it for a while," I whispered. The words tasted both natural and foreign. Natural because I was her mother, and mothers trust their children. Foreign because something deep inside me resisted, a voice that murmured, "She does not see it the way you do. Be careful." Still, I silenced that voice. I wanted to believe that when a mother is weak, her child will protect her, not betray her. Marissa's eyes flicked down at the keys. She twirled them once on her finger, then slipped them into her bag with a casualness that unsettled me. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle it," she said. Ethan smirked slightly, still glued to his phone. Neither of them touched my arm or met my gaze for long. As the nurses wheeled me toward the operating room, the fluorescent lights passed above me like cold stars. Each one marked a beat of dread in my chest. My mind drifted to the hens, to the creak of the barn door, to the smell of tilled earth. I pictured the roses, their petals heavy with dew, waiting for morning. Would they be tended with care, or neglected, or worse? I wanted to close my eyes and trust my daughter fully, but that small whisper inside me kept warning. It reminded me of her laughter at the dinner table, of Ethan's mocking voice as he filmed our life like a comedy. My heart ached, not only from illness, but from the weight of uncertainty. The gurney came to a stop outside the operating room. A nurse adjusted the IV line, murmuring words I barely heard. I felt the edges of consciousness slipping again. My hand sought the lace handkerchief. the one I had carried through every chapter of my life. I pulled it from beneath my pillow, the fabric cool and familiar between my fingers. With effort, I placed it on the small metal table beside the bed. My hand trembled, my pulse weak, yet the gesture was deliberate. That handkerchief had been with me at weddings and funerals, through storms and harvests, through joy and grief. Now it would wait for me here, a silent witness to whether my daughter honored the trust I had just placed in her. I whispered a prayer into the sterile air, not for my survival alone, but for my family, for the land, for the dignity that felt so fragile. The nurses pushed the gurney forward, and the last thing I saw before the doors closed was that handkerchief resting on the table, its lace edges catching the harsh fluorescent light. My fingers still tingled with the memory of its weight. That image would stay with me, stronger than the pain, stronger than the fear. It would become the mark of a promise, one I hoped would not be broken. While I lay unconscious beneath the harsh lights of the operating room, my daughter and her husband were already setting their plans into motion. The ink on the medical power of attorney was barely dry, my signature scrawled when my vision had been blurred and my body weak. I had trusted Marissa when she told me it was for insurance purposes. I had believed the child I raised would protect me while I fought for my health. Instead, she and Ethan walked into the Millbrook Valley Bank on a bright Tuesday morning, carrying that very paper as if it were a golden key. The tellers knew me. They had watched me bring in baskets of eggs to deposit cash over the years, had seen me sign checks with hands still smelling of soil. But they did not see me that day. They saw my daughter, well-dressed, her voice confident, the document stamped and notarized. Ethan hovered at her side, his grin fixed, his phone tucked neatly in his jacket pocket, as though even fraud might one day be turned into content. They told the bank manager that my medical expenses were mounting, that I needed help covering the costs. They played the part of dutiful children, willing to shoulder responsibility. The farm, they said, was more than land. It was a way to ensure the best care for their mother. It was convincing enough. The bank did not call the hospital. They did not question why the sale was happening so quickly. Papers were signed, documents filed, and within hours, the heart of my family's history was exchanged for a sum written neatly on a cashier's check. But the truth was simple. My hospital bills were already paid. I had set aside money years ago, enough to cover what I might need without touching the land. Marissa and Ethan knew none of this. They only saw dollar signs, the lure of instant wealth, the chance to live a life beyond the farm they despised. Claire, my neighbor of more than 30 years, happened to be walking past the bank that morning. She had stopped to pay a utility bill, her arms full of envelopes, when she saw Marissa and Ethan step out. Their faces glowed, not with concern, but with triumph. They looked like gamblers who had just won big, their laughter sharp against the quiet street. Claire called out to them, her voice friendly, unsuspecting. "What's going on? You two look like you just won the lottery." Marissa glanced at Ethan before answering. She smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Just taking care of business," she said. Ethan's grin widened, and with a careless chuckle, he added, "Poor Mom won't even notice." The words cut through Claire like a chill wind. She told me later how she froze on the sidewalk, her envelopes slipping slightly in her arms. She wanted to ask more, but the two of them walked quickly away, their heads bent together, already planning how to spend money that did not belong to them. Inside the hospital, I stirred faintly in my bed, unaware of what was unfolding outside. Machines beeped steadily, nurses moved softly around me, and I dreamed of the roses back home swaying gently in the breeze. In those dreams, I believed my daughter was tending them, that the chickens were fed, that the land was safe. Reality, however, was a very different picture. Ink drying on fraudulent contracts, land transferred to strangers, and neighbors catching glimpses of my child's betrayal. Later, Claire told me she had gone home unsettled, pacing her kitchen with the envelope still unopened. She had no proof, only the echo of Ethan's words. Still, she felt something was wrong. She thought of calling me but assumed I was too unwell to talk. So she stayed quiet, troubled, waiting. That was the first moment when my private suffering began to bleed into the wider world, when others started to sense the fracture that had opened between me and the child I had raised. The betrayal was no longer confined to whispered conversations or mocking glances at my dinner table. It was written in contracts, stamped by the bank, and carried on the lips of a neighbor who could not believe what she had heard. When I finally awoke days later, weak but alive, the damage had already been done. The land I had cherished was no longer legally mine. And though I did not yet know it, the words, "Poor mom won't even notice," would come back to me like an iron bell, ringing louder with every step I took toward the truth. When I finally opened my eyes after the surgery, the world felt fragile. The ceiling above me was a blur of pale tiles, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor filling the silence. My body ached, but I was alive. I whispered a thank you under my breath, grateful that breath still moved in and out of me. I thought survival meant I still had something to return. Too, that the land was waiting for me just as I had left it. 4 days later, Claire drove me home. The nurse helped me into the passenger seat, and I pressed the lace handkerchief to my lips, as if it could anchor me to the life I knew. The drive back to the farm felt longer than usual. My chest tightened with both hope and unease. But nothing prepared me for the sight that met me when the car pulled into the lane. My roses, rows I had tended for decades, bushes planted by my grandmother, were gone, flattened. The soil was torn open, raw, scarred by the heavy tracks of machinery. The hens were scattered, their coop half dismantled. And where the garden once bloomed, a yellow bulldozer stood idle, as if mocking me with its stillness. I could not speak. My hands gripped the door until my knuckles whitened. Claire's voice trembled. "Lillian, I'm so sorry. I didn't know they would start this soon." On the porch sat a large white envelope. She helped me to the chair beside the door while I opened it with shaking fingers. The letterhead was from Westfield Development Corporation. The words were cold, impersonal, typed neatly across the page. "Thank you for your recent sale of property. Construction on the new project will commence immediately. We appreciate your cooperation, sale." Cooperation. Words that made no sense to me in that moment. I had not sold anything. I had been lying in a hospital bed, trusting my daughter. And yet here it was, written in black and white. My land was no longer mine. I pressed the letter against my chest, the air around me suddenly thinner, harder to breathe. I felt as though I had been lowered into the ground while still alive. "I survived," I whispered to myself. "I survived the surgery, but the land is gone. It's as if they buried me anyway." My mind raced back through memories, each one stabbing deeper. My husband's hands, planting those roses with me after our wedding. The way my daughter, as a little girl, used to run through the rows laughing, her hair catching the sunlight. Even the hardships, the storms, the droughts, had bound me to that soil. Every scar in the earth carried a piece of my story. And now, strangers with machines had erased it in days. Tears welled, blurring the bulldozer, the broken coop, the scarred yard. I pulled out the lace handkerchief, the same one I had left beside my hospital bed before surgery. It smelled faintly of lavender, a ghost of the life I had lived. I pressed it to my face, and in its fabric I poured out the grief I could not voice aloud. Claire laid her hand gently on my shoulder. You should rest, Lillian. We'll figure this out. But how could I rest? Rest belonged to people who still had a place to wake up in. I felt hollow, as though the ground beneath me had been pulled away. I dabbed the tears from my cheeks, folding the handkerchief neatly in my lap. I would not let Marissa see me broken. She had taken the land, but I refused to let her take my dignity. That night, lying in my bed, I listened to the silence. No hens clucking, no rustle of roses brushing against the window. Just silence. My body was weak, but my mind would not sleep. Again and again I saw the bulldozer crushing the earth, my daughter's hand casually slipping my keys into her purse, Ethan's smirk as he filmed his life while dismantling mine. The letter sat on the bedside table. I read it over and over until the words became meaningless shapes. Thank you for your recent sale. My hand clenched around the handkerchief. I whispered into the darkness. I never agreed to this. The truth was bitter but clear. They had stolen not only my land, but also the belief that family was sacred. In that hollow emptiness, a seed of something else began to stir. Quiet, steady, unyielding. The same way roses push through hard soil to bloom again. For now, though, I wiped the last tears from my eyes, folded the handkerchief once more, and placed it under my pillow. The land was gone, yes, but I was still here. And as long as I drew breath, the story was not over. The morning after I returned home, still weak from surgery and crushed by the sight of bulldozers on my land, Marissa appeared at the hospital once more. I had been readmitted overnight after my blood pressure spiked. The sterile white room hummed with machines, and the scent of antiseptic clung to everything. I sat upright in the bed, my lace handkerchief folded neatly on the blanket beside me. My heart was fragile, but my mind was steady. Marissa swept in as though she owned the place, her heels clicking against the tile. Ethan followed, holding his phone high, the little red light glowing as he recorded. "Smile, babe," he whispered to her. "This is part of the journey." People need to see what success looks like. I turned my head slowly toward them. For a moment, I hoped, perhaps foolishly, that they had come to explain, to apologize, to show even a flicker of regret. Instead, Marissa placed her bag on the counter and crossed her arms. Her eyes were cold, detached. "Mom," she began, her tone sharp enough to cut, "you're just a poor old woman. I saved us." The words landed heavy in the room, louder than the monitors beeping. I felt them press into my chest, heavier than the weight of my illness. I studied her face, the same face I had kissed when she was a child, the same lips that once asked for bedtime stories. Now they formed words of dismissal, words that stripped me of worth in a single breath. Ethan moved closer to the window where the light was better, adjusting the angle of his phone. "Tell them, babe," he urged. "Tell them how we turned things around. Our followers need to hear the truth." Marissa straightened, her voice rising with a rehearsed confidence. "We made a choice," she said into the camera. "No more living in that broken farmhouse. No more wasting away. We sold the land, and now we're building a future. This is how you change your life." She smiled at her reflection in the phone screen, not at me. Ethan panned the camera across the room, briefly capturing my frail figure in the bed, my hand resting on the handkerchief. "See?" he said cheerfully to his unseen audience. "This is what sacrifice looks like. Sometimes you have to take charge, even if others don't understand." I remained silent. My lips did not form a reply. My eyes stayed fixed on the folds of the handkerchief, tracing the worn lace edges with my finger. Inside me, emotions swirled: pain, anger, disbelief, but I gave them no voice. I knew that any protest, any plea, would be twisted into their narrative. To them, my sorrow would be weakness, my resistance just another thing to mock. Marissa laughed suddenly, tossing her hair. "Don't look so shocked, Mom. You couldn't manage that land anymore. We did what had to be done. You should be grateful." Grateful? The word stung. Grateful that my roses were uprooted? Grateful that the soil my husband and I worked for decades was sold to strangers for their vacation fund? My silence grew heavier, filling the room like an invisible wall. Ethan lowered the phone for a moment, grinning at Marissa. "Babe, the comments are blowing up. People love the story. They're calling us brave. Some even say we're inspirational." She smirked, satisfied, then glanced back at me. "See, Mom? The world understands. You're the only one holding on to the past." Still, I said nothing. I adjusted the blanket over my lap, smoothed the fabric of the handkerchief, and let the silence speak for me. My stillness unsettled them more than shouting ever could. Marissa's smile faltered slightly, as though she expected resistance and didn't know how to handle its absence. Finally, she sighed dramatically, grabbed her bag, and turned toward the door. "We'll be back later. Rest up. Maybe someday you'll thank us." Ethan winked at the phone before ending the recording. "Don't worry, we'll edit it. Make it look polished." Then he followed her out, their voices fading down the hallway. When the door closed, I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I picked up the handkerchief, pressed it gently against my lips, and whispered only to myself. My silence was not weakness. It was memory. It was dignity. It was the space where strength was gathering, waiting for its moment. The monitor beeped steadily beside me, the rhythm of my heart refusing to stop. And in that steady rhythm, I found a truth deeper than their insults. I was not finished. 2 days later, the first photographs appeared on my phone. Even with a hospital wristband on my arm, the feed kept refreshing. Marissa stood on a pale boardwalk above Robin's egg water, a glass of champagne raised toward the camera. Ethan's caption read, "Finally living. Our dream. #blessed. #new beginnings." The resort tag glowed like a marquee I had never seen. Their smiles were white, their skin sunlit, their world filtered until it gleamed unreal. Back at the farmhouse, I lay propped against pillows, a heating pad on my shoulder, and a bottle of pills on the nightstand. Claire had stocked the fridge and swept broken twigs from the porch. In the hush that follows machines and monitors, a house can feel like a convalescent ward. The phone warmed my hand. Another post slid up the screen. Breakfast above an endless sea, gold bubbles freckling a crystal rim. Marissa's manicured finger tapping a heart for herself. A video followed. Ethan, grinning, dove into clear water while a dolphin sliced past. Marissa squealed, the sound polished by the resort microphones. The caption read, "Work hard, play harder, invest in joy." I heard gulls outside my own window, and the creak of a porch swing that needed oil. The distance between our worlds felt wider than any ocean. They had purchased a stage, and they were determined to perform a life that did not include me. I have never begrudged anyone a sunrise or a celebration. I only know what those pictures cost. They did not pay with overtime or saved bonuses. They paid with roses ground into clay, with fence posts uprooted, with the history of a farmhouse stripped for parts like an old car. They call it an investment in happiness. I call it spending on the sweat of someone else, The words tasted like brine. My mouth went dry and my fingers shook around the phone. I set the screen down and pressed my lace handkerchief flat on my thigh, smoothing a corner where the stitching had loosened. In those faded threads, I saw the day my husband gave it to me. A summer fair, a cone of peanuts, his shy grin when he noticed me wiping my eyes during a fiddle tune. We were poor then, or so any ledger would claim, yet my heart felt full. We worked, we saved, we kept faith with the soil. The screen lit again. A platter of oysters, a sunset dinner on a pier. To the life we deserve, the caption declared. I let the sentence sit in the room until it sounded hollow. Deserve is a dangerous word when it becomes a crowbar. I remembered a different dinner from years ago. Rain would not stop. I made soup from the last onions and the first kale, stretched flour into noodles, and baked biscuits with bacon fat saved in a jar. Marissa was 8 then, all elbows and questions. She asked why I turned off lights in empty rooms. I told her we were teaching the house to rest so it could wake. Afterward, I walked her to the garden and showed her how to pinch basil to branch. She pressed seeds into soil with her thumb and asked if plants could hear. They could hear patience. She asked what patience sounded like. I said, rain on a tin roof. On Saturdays, I sold eggs and jars of pickles at the co-op downtown. I learned which customers wanted brown shells and which wanted blue. I learned to line the table so the jars caught morning light. In the afternoons, I weeded rows and hummed to keep time. When Marissa wanted store-bought dresses, I bartered berry pies for sewing lessons with a woman at church. Those were not glamorous years, yet they were honest. They polished the spine of our lives. Another video arrived. A private lagoon of a room, towels folded into swans, Ethan's voice saying, manifesting abundance. I shut my eyes and saw my husband's boots by the back door, clay flaking from the soles like crumbs from a crust. He said abundance was not a pile of coins, but a field that could feed people and leave the soil stronger the next year. He died before algorithms and personal brands. He would not understand the performance of prosperity. I turned the phone face down and folded my handkerchief into a square. My fingers remembered the shape without looking. Outside, evening light pulled long across the yard, touching what remained as if to say the day was not lost. I breathed slowly until the tremor softened. I could not reclaim the hours they spent, nor the dollars that bought the spectacle. I could reclaim what the spectacle tried to steal, my sense of what is real and my will to rise again. The afternoon sun slanted across my kitchen table, painting long stripes over the wood scarred with decades of meals and homework. I sat there in silence, the same lace handkerchief folded carefully beside my teacup. The phone still lay face down, as if I could keep the world from flashing its cruelty at me by refusing to look. I tried to sip tea, but the cup rattled faintly in my hands. Then came a knock at the door, light but certain. When I opened it, Claire stood there, holding a pie still warm from the oven. The smell of apples and cinnamon spilled into the air like a memory of kinder days. She gave me a small, tentative smile. I thought you could use this, she said. I stepped aside and she entered, her boots clicking softly on the worn floor. She placed the pie on the table, then glanced at me, her eyes catching the hollowness I could not hide. I offered no explanation. None was needed. She had already seen too much. The bulldozers, the signatures, the smirks of my daughter and her husband. Claire pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Her hand smoothed the tablecloth, the gesture almost maternal. She studied me for a long moment, her voice low when she finally spoke. Lillian, I would give anything for a mother like you. The words pierced me deeper than accusation ever could. She said them with such sincerity that for a heartbeat I could not breathe. My own daughter had called me a poor old woman and stripped me of dignity. Yet here was my neighbor, her eyes damp with truth, offering a reflection I had almost forgotten, that I was worth loving, worth respecting. I said nothing. My silence was heavy, but Claire seemed to understand it. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the framed photographs that still hung on the walls. My late husband cradling a newborn calf, Marissa as a little girl holding her first basket of eggs. Claire's lips trembled. Do you know how many nights I wished my mother had stayed, had fought for us instead of leaving? You gave Marissa what I could only dream of. Her words echoed in the empty space between us. I folded my handkerchief, pressing the fabric against my palm to steady myself. My throat burned, but no sound came. Claire's gratitude, her longing, shone a mirror at my pain. Where my daughter offered disdain, a neighbor offered reverence. Claire leaned forward, her eyes fierce now. Don't you believe for 1 second that what they did defines you? Anyone with sense can see the truth. You've carried this place, this family, with grace. That kind of strength doesn't vanish because someone else is blind. I nodded faintly, though my voice remained buried. I did not want to cry before her, yet her presence cracked the wall I had built inside. A tear slipped down my cheek despite my efforts, and I quickly pressed the handkerchief to catch it. She reached across the table and touched my hand gently. Let me say what Marissa should have said. Thank you for the meals, the wisdom, the kindness you've given this community. We see it, even if she doesn't. Her words lingered long after she rose to leave. She left the pie on the table, wrapped in a towel stitched with sunflowers. When the door closed, I sat staring at it, my chest tight. Claire's kindness did not erase the betrayal, but it revealed it more starkly. By honoring me, she showed just how deeply my daughter had dishonored me. I sliced the pie and tasted it slowly. The crust flaked, the filling sweet with tart edges. It was not just food. It was proof that someone saw me. Someone valued what Marissa dismissed. The contrast was painful, but also clarifying. Claire's reflection lit the truth I needed to face. My worth had never depended on Marissa's approval. In the hush of the kitchen, I whispered into the folds of my handkerchief. They may call me poor, but poverty is not measured in money. Poverty is blindness of the heart. The room was still, the pie steaming gently, and for the first time since the bulldozers arrived, I felt a fragile thread of dignity weave itself back through me. That night, when the moon rose over the torn fields, I found myself walking slowly toward the part of the house I had kept locked for years. My steps echoed against the floorboards. The key rested cold in my palm, tied to the same ribbon that had once sealed love letters. For decades, no one but me had entered this room. Even Marissa had never been allowed past its door. The lock clicked open with a tired groan. I pushed the door inward, and the scent of paper and cedar met me like a forgotten hymn. The air was still, heavy with secrets I had chosen to protect. Against one wall stood tall filing cabinets, their drawers labeled in neat handwriting. Against another, a row of shelves bowed under the weight of boxes filled with contracts, patents, and press clippings. I turned on the small lamp, its yellow glow spilling across a desk scratched from years of use. There, beneath a glass sheet, lay the photograph that always stilled my heart. My husband and I shaking hands with the first investor, the day we signed more Agritech into being. His smile was young, proud. My eyes were full of determination. We had started with one soil sensor, a simple invention meant to help farmers measure moisture more accurately. We never imagined it would grow into an empire. I opened the top drawer. Neatly stacked were annual reports, sealed envelopes from lawyers, and folders marked with the names of international partners. At the bottom rested a copy of Forbes with a headline I had never shown anyone: "The Invisible Matriarch Behind Moore Agritech." The article called me a visionary, yet I had chosen to keep that vision hidden. I ran my hand across the pages. "I chose to live as a farmer," I whispered, "because I never needed anyone to know I was wealthy. My joy was in the soil, in the work, in the dignity of living quietly." The handkerchief slipped from my pocket, and I laid it across the desk, its lace brushing the corner of the old contract. The past and present touched each other in that moment. But now, my silence had been twisted into weakness. Marissa and Ethan had seen only an old woman with a farmhouse and a leaking roof. They thought my quiet life meant I had nothing beyond it. They took advantage of that silence, turning it into a weapon against me. I leafed through the contracts, the numbers bold on the pages, hundreds of patents, millions in licensing deals, a company valued at nearly $500 million. The truth hummed through those documents like a current. Every late night, every risk we had taken, every harvest I had poured back into the dream, all of it lived here, hidden behind this door. On the shelf above the desk sat a small wooden box. I opened it to find the fountain pen my husband had used to sign our very first patent. Its nib was tarnished, but I could still see the ink stains along the barrel. Holding it, I felt his hand guiding mine once more. We had vowed not to flaunt our success, not to let money dictate the way people treated us. We wanted to be seen as neighbors, not as benefactors or targets. I closed my eyes, remembering the night we made that decision. Sitting at this very desk, he had said, "We'll live simply, Lillian. Let the company serve farmers, not our egos. The world doesn't need another dynasty flashing its wealth. It needs quiet strength," I had agreed, gladly. For decades, that vow shaped every choice I made. Now I saw the cost of it. My daughter never understood the silence was protection, not poverty. She never asked why the bills were always paid, or why the farm never truly went under, no matter the drought. She assumed it was luck or stubbornness. She never considered there was more. I placed the fountain pen beside the handkerchief and leaned back in the chair. The truth of who I was lay spread before me. Farmer, widow, mother, and silent owner of Moore Agritech, a company worth $485 million. Yet none of that mattered to Marissa. She had sold me off with a signature, convinced she was saving us from nothing. The irony burned deep. For years I had hidden this truth to protect her. Now it was the very truth that would expose her. I whispered into the stillness, "You called me poor, child. But it is not my pockets that are empty. It is your heart." My voice echoed softly against the papers and walls, a revelation I had kept locked away too long. I folded the handkerchief, tucked it back into my pocket, and turned off the lamp. The room returned to shadow, but the decision inside me was lit. My silence had ended. The morning after I reopened the locked room, I sat at the oak table with the documents spread before me like a deck of cards. My tea had gone cold, but my mind was awake in a way it hadn't been for months. The handkerchief rested near my hand, steadying me as if my husband's quiet strength lingered in its threads. I had carried grief, betrayal, and silence. But now it was time to carry something else. Resolve. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. After 3 rings, a voice both professional and familiar answered. "Maggie Lawson speaking." I smiled faintly. "Maggie, it's Lillian Moore." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Lillian. My goodness, I can't believe it's you. It's been, what, 5 years? How are you?" I drew a slow breath. "Recovering from surgery. and recovering from something far more difficult. Her tone shifted instantly, from warmth to concern. What happened? I hesitated only a moment before speaking the truth. My daughter and her husband sold the farm while I was under anesthesia. They used a forged power of attorney. I came home to bulldozers, and a letter from Westfield Development Silence filled the line. Then Maggie's voice sharpened. Westfield? You mean the Westfield Development Corporation? Yes. There was the faint rustle of papers on her end, as if she were already searching her files. Lillian, you realize Westfield is one of Moore Agritech's subsidiaries? They sold your land to your own company. I closed my eyes for a moment. Hearing it said aloud was like a stone dropping into still water, ripples spreading wide. Yes, I whispered. I know. That's why I'm calling. She let out a low whistle. That is both tragic and extraordinary. They think they've robbed you blind, but in reality, I finished softly, they handed everything right back to me. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a shift deep inside. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was power, quiet, steady, unflinching. Maggie's voice carried both outrage and admiration. Lillian, this is the most absurdly poetic situation I've ever seen. They think you're powerless, and they've signed the deed directly into your hands. I pressed the handkerchief flat against the table, grounding myself. They called me a poor old woman. They laughed as if I were nothing. But I am still the majority owner of Moore Agritech, Maggie. The land is mine, and the law is mine too. Maggie chuckled, though it carried an edge of fury on my behalf. If you want, I'll file charges immediately. Fraud, theft, misrepresentation. You'd have the sheriff at their door by sundown. I shook my head, though she could not see me. My voice came steady, each word measured. No, not yet. The law is patient, and so am I. Let them believe they've won. Let them drink their champagne and flaunt their hashtags. The right moment will come, and when it does, truth will stand taller than their lies. On the other end of the line, Maggie went quiet. Finally, she said, You've always had that steel in you, Lillian. Most people would rush into battle. You wait, and when you strike clean. I thought of Marissa's words, poor old woman, and Ethan's camera catching my silence. They mistook that silence for surrender. They had no idea silence could also be strategy. Maggie's tone softened. Tell me what you need. I leaned back in the chair, eyes on the photograph of my husband above the desk. I need you to prepare the documents, gather every piece of proof that ties Westfield to Moore Agritech. And then, when the moment is right, I need you standing beside me. She answered without hesitation. You'll have it. And you'll have me. Just say the word. I ended the call, and let the quiet return. My fingers traced the edges of the old contracts. The ink faded, but the meaning sharp. For years, I had chosen to live humbly, to let the world think me ordinary. That choice had been my shield. Now, it would be my sword. I folded the handkerchief carefully, tucking it into my pocket. The power reversal had begun. I was no longer just the victim of betrayal. I was the one holding the cards, waiting for the table to turn. And it would, because patience, like soil, yields its fruit in time. I rose slowly, my body still weak but my spine straight. In the window's reflection, I saw not a frail widow, but a woman who still carried the strength of generations. My daughter thought she had buried me under signatures and lies. She had no idea I was already standing again. We'll wait for the right moment, I whispered to the empty room. And this time, silence was not defeat. It was promise. The morning of the council meeting arrived with a stillness that felt almost sacred. I sat at the edge of my bed, sunlight pouring across the quilt, and unfolded my lace handkerchief one last time. Its fabric was thin now, delicate as breath, but the strength woven into those stitches had never failed me. Slowly, deliberately, I folded it again, crease by crease, and slipped it into the pocket of my jacket. That simple act carried the weight of generations, a ritual more powerful than armor. Every movement seemed to happen in slow motion. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. I poured tea, though my stomach could not hold it. The clock ticked above the mantel, each second reminding me that silence was no longer a hiding place, but a stage. I stood before the mirror, saw the lines on my face, the silver in my hair. These were not marks of weakness. They were evidence. Proof that I had lived, endured, and risen again. Maggie arrived just after noon, her briefcase heavy with files. She set it on the table and opened it, spreading out neat stacks of papers, each one a stone in the foundation we were about to lay. "Here it is," she said, her voice calm, though her eyes gleamed with a fire I remembered from years ago. "The incorporation documents, the patents, the shareholder registry. They can't argue with this, Lillian. Truth this solid cannot be denied." I nodded, smoothing the edges of one folder with my hand. "We won't rush. We'll let them speak first, build their illusion higher, and then we'll lift the veil." Maggie smiled faintly. "You always did understand timing better than anyone." She glanced at the handkerchief peeking from my pocket and tilted her head. "Still carrying that with you?" "Always," I answered. "It's more than cloth. It's memory. It's promise." Later that afternoon, Claire stopped by. She carried no pie this time, only her presence, steady as the ground beneath us. She stood in the doorway, her voice low. "I hear they're planning quite a show tonight." "Your daughter's been boasting all week." "I know," I said softly. Claire's eyes filled with something between sorrow and pride. "Then I'll be there, Lillian. Not in the front, not beside you, just in the back row, where you can see me if you need to. Sometimes knowing someone is standing quietly behind you is enough." Her words reached me deeper than I expected. I pressed the handkerchief through the fabric of my jacket, feeling its edges against my heart. "Thank you, Claire. That means more than you know." She gave a small nod, her eyes shining. "You've carried others all your life. Tonight, let us carry you a little." As she left, the house fell quiet again, but the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt poised, like an orchestra waiting for the conductor's hand. Grief still lived in me, yes, but beside it now stood something sturdier, resolve, calm as stone. I walked once more into the locked room, where the files of more Agritech lined the shelves. My hand lingered over the photograph of my husband, his smile still caught in that handshake decades ago. "We kept our vow," I whispered to him. "We lived simply, we built quietly. But tonight, they'll learn the truth of what that meant." The clock struck 6. I gathered the papers into a leather folder Maggie had given me long ago. She closed her briefcase, her heels clicking on the floorboards like the first beats of a drum. Together, we stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, the sky brushed with the colors of evening. For the first time since my surgery, I straightened fully, shoulders back, breath steady. This was the pivot. The place where mourning met resistance, where silence became testimony. My daughter thought she had buried me under signatures and bulldozers. Tonight, she would learn that a mother's strength is not so easily erased. I touched the handkerchief through my pocket one last time, whispering to myself as I walked toward the waiting car. From sorrow to strength. From silence to truth, the engine started. The road stretched out ahead, and I was ready. The community hall was already full by the time Maggie and I arrived. Pickup trucks and polished SUVs crowded the gravel lot outside, and through the tall windows, I could see neighbors and officials filling the rows of folding chairs. The hum of voices carried into the evening air, like the buzz of bees before a storm. I stepped inside slowly, the lace handkerchief folded tight in my palm, hidden in my pocket, its presence steadying me. The room smelled of old wood and coffee brewed too long. Banners from past harvest festivals still hung along the back wall, faded from years of sunlight. Tonight, though, there was nothing festive about the gathering. At the front stood a projector, its screen already glowing with the words, "Anderson Commons, a vision for the future." I slipped into a chair in the last row. Maggie took the seat beside me, her briefcase resting at her feet. Claire sat 2 chairs down, true to her word, close enough for me to feel her quiet presence, but not so close as to draw attention. My heart thudded in my chest, steady and strong. Then Marissa appeared. My daughter walked onto the stage in a navy blazer, heels clicking against the wooden floor, her hair styled perfectly, her confidence rehearsed. Ethan followed, phone raised, the red light of his live stream glowing like a beacon. "Smile, babe," he whispered. "Our family is leading this town forward." She turned toward the microphone with a practiced smile. "Good evening, friends, neighbors, and council members. Thank you for gathering tonight to hear about an exciting new chapter for our community. For generations, the Anderson land has been a symbol of hard work. But times change. Tonight, I'm proud to present the Anderson Commons Shopping Mall, a place of progress, growth, and opportunity. Applause rippled through the front rows. Some nodded eagerly, hungry for jobs, for change. Others shifted uneasily, remembering the farm as it had been, unsure whether to clap. Ethan swept his phone across the crowd, narrating to his online followers. "Look at this turnout, folks. Our family is stepping up. We're building something big right here in Millbrook Valley." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded over the handkerchief in my lap, the lace soft against my fingers. Each word from Marissa's mouth cut deeper, yet I refused to flinch. She spoke of progress as if the land were just soil and numbers, not memory and legacy. She spoke of vision as if betrayal could be dressed up in PowerPoint slides and hashtags. Her voice grew stronger, feeding off the crowd. "This project will bring new jobs, new revenue, and a brighter future. My husband and I worked tirelessly to make this possible. We sacrificed so our town could move forward." She paused for effect, letting her eyes sweep across the audience, never once glancing to the back row where I sat. Ethan turned the camera toward her again. "There she is, folks. The woman leading her family into the future. Show some love in the comments." He winked at the lens, proud as though he had built the land himself with his bare hands. Around me, neighbors murmured. Some leaned toward each other, whispering questions. Others nodded, hopeful that prosperity might finally reach their doorsteps. No one looked back at me. No one knew the weight of the truth resting quietly in my pocket. I studied my daughter as she clicked through slides of glossy renderings, glass storefronts, neon signs, happy families shopping where corn once grew. Each image felt like a blow, but I breathed slowly in and out. This was her stage, her performance, and performances end. The council members scribbled notes, their faces unreadable. They asked polite questions, and Marissa answered with polished lines. "Yes, we've secured financing. Yes, Westfield Development is committed to excellence. Yes, our family fully supports this vision." My grip tightened on the handkerchief. The threads pressed into my palm, grounding me, reminding me of the vow I made to wait for the right moment. Maggie glanced at me from the corner of her eye, a silent question flickering there. Not yet, I thought. Let them build the illusion higher. At the front, Marissa spread her arms wide. And so I ask you all to join me in embracing this future. Together, we can honor the Anderson legacy by transforming it into something greater. A hush settled as her final words hung in the air. The applause came again, louder this time. Ethan turned his phone back on the crowd, grinning triumphantly. See that? This is history in the making. In the back row, I finally lifted my eyes. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my gaze from the handkerchief to the stage, to my daughter standing tall under the bright lights. The room blurred for a moment, but my vision cleared with a steadiness I had not felt in months. The time was drawing near. The applause swelled and then thinned to a murmur. Marissa leaned into the microphone with the confidence of someone who believes the ending is already written. "Our family agreed," she announced. "My mother supports us fully." The sentence struck me like cold water. For a heartbeat, the hall seemed to tilt. Then everything settled into a ringing quiet. I felt the handkerchief beneath my fingers, its lace cool against my skin. Maggie's shoulder brushed mine. Claire's silhouette, 2 seats over, held still as a held breath. No one in the front rows turned around. They didn't have to. The lie was meant to glide past and settle like dust. Ethan lifted his phone to catch the line, angling the lens to snare applause. The red light glowed, comments scrolled. The narrative assembled itself on command. I stood. The chair legs rasped against the floorboards, a single sound that traveled the room. Marissa flinched, then pretended she had not heard it. She pressed on. "We are grateful for the town's trust." Her eyes skipped the back row as if it did not exist. I lifted my chin and let my voice carry. "Actually, your mother is here." The words were not loud, but the room heard them. Heads turned. Gasps cracked the hush. Whispers rose and fell. "Is that Lillian? I thought she was still ill. Why is she back there?" And then faded as people shifted to see. Ethan's camera jerked, hunting for me, the red light stuttering as his hand trembled. Marissa found me at last. For a moment, she looked 12. Caught, cornered, small. Then the performance snapped back like elastic. She smiled too hard and addressed the crowd with the brightness of a failing bulb. "Of course my mother is here," she said, words too sharp. "She is proud of what we're doing." I held her gaze and did not blink. The years between us lay on the floor like a rope, and she tugged at it with every syllable. I did not tug back. I only stood, breathing evenly, letting the silence between our sentences grow heavy enough to startle those who had come for a show. A councilman cleared his throat. "Mrs. Moore, would you like a seat closer to the front?" "Thank you," I said, "but the back will do." I kept my hands folded around the handkerchief so I would not reach for the past in anger. Marissa's smile faltered. "Mom, perhaps we can speak after," she offered, voice sugar-sweet and thin. "We will," I answered, "but we will also speak now." A rustle moved through the room, the sound of expectation resetting itself. Power does not always shift with thunder. Sometimes it tilts by degrees, politely, like a picture frame realigned on a wall. I felt that tilt as surely as I feel rain in my knees. Ethan tried to rescue the moment. "We love transparency," he told his live stream, "and we love family." The words sounded like props. No one laughed. I stepped 1 row forward. "You told this town I agreed," I said, my tone calm, conversational, as if we were still at my kitchen table and not under the hot lights of a stage. "You told strangers that I support you fully." Marissa's lips tightened. "We discussed it," she said. "You were in no condition to handle details." "We did not discuss consent," I replied. We discussed trust. The council chair shifted, pen poised. The community had come for a development pitch and found a family reckoning. People straightened, phones lowered. The air took on the quality of a prayer. I did not list grievances. I did not catalog roses in the dirt or the coupe undone. I let the truth touch the surface. I am here, I said, and I did not agree. Silence accepted the statement like the first footprint in new snow. The line of Marissa's shoulders changed. The proud angle dipped. Her eyes flickered, measuring the room, the votes, the cameras, the mother who refused to play the part she had written for me. She reached for the microphone. Her hand shook once before she steadied it. "Let's remain respectful," she said. "This is about progress." "Respect," I answered, "begins with truth." A woman in the second row nodded. Claire's quiet breath beside me felt like a blessing. Maggie shifted her weight, ready but patient. I could feel the next moment gathering itself, the way a wave gathers height before it breaks. I did not rush it. I did not need to. Power had already taken a step toward me, and even a single step can redraw a map. I lifted my eyes to the stage lights and waited for the room to realize what it had already felt. The crowd sensed the turn. The first reversal had begun. The hush in that hall was thick enough to press against my skin. My daughter stood at the podium, her practiced smile stiff, her hand trembling just enough for those in the front row to notice. Ethan's phone hovered in midair, its red light still glowing, though his voice had faltered. The town waited for someone to breathe, to decide which way the night would turn. I stepped forward, one row at a time, the handkerchief warm in my palm. My voice carried steady, calm, and unshakable. "You sold my land," I said, letting the words land like stones dropped into a well. "To me." The sentence cracked through the silence. Murmurs rippled. A chair creaked. A child whispered to his mother. At the front, Marissa's smile broke. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, but her voice pitched higher than usual, betraying the panic rising behind her practiced tone. I stopped halfway down the aisle, not close enough to crowd her, but near enough for the crowd to see my face clearly. "Westfield Development," I continued, my voice slow and deliberate. "The company you thought would profit from my land. Westfield belongs to More Agritech, and More Agritech belongs, majority and controlling, to me." Gasps erupted. Ethan lowered his phone an inch, uncertain whether to keep recording or pretend the live stream had never begun. His eyes darted to Marissa, then back to me, wide and confused. That's not possible," he stammered. "You're just a farmer?" I asked gently. "Just a poor old woman?" I turned slightly, my gaze sweeping the hall. "That's what they told you. That's what they told themselves." Maggie rose from her seat in the back row and walked to the front with her briefcase. Her heels clicked on the wooden floor, the sound sharp as a gavel. She placed a stack of papers on the council's table, each page aligned with precision. "For the record," she said, her voice crisp, "here are the incorporation documents for Moore Agritech, listing Mrs. Lillian Moore as the 73% shareholder and controlling owner. Westfield Development is, as you will see, a wholly owned subsidiary." The council chair leaned forward, glasses slipping down his nose as he scanned the bold headings and signatures. His brows lifted, then drew together. He whispered to the member beside him, who nodded with a frown. The documents passed from one hand to another, the truth spreading like fire across dry grass. Marissa's face drained of color. She reached for the microphone, but her hand quivered. This is some mistake," she said, forcing a laugh that no one joined. "My mother she couldn't—" "I could," I said, my tone level. "And I did, decades ago. While you were playing in the rose garden, I was building something that grew roots far deeper than you ever saw. I chose to keep it quiet because money changes people. It blinds them. Tonight, we all see proof of that. The audience shifted uneasily. Some crossed their arms, others leaned forward, waiting for the next blow. Ethan swallowed hard and tried to fill the silence. Look, everyone, this is not what it seems. We acted responsibly. But Maggie's hand landed firmly on the documents, silencing him with nothing more than the weight of fact. You acted fraudulently, she said. The power of attorney was for medical care, not financial transactions. You sold land you had no right to sell, and you sold it to your mother's company. The words hit harder than any gavel could. Ethan's mouth opened and closed, searching for a rebuttal that would not come. Marissa pressed a hand to her forehead, her eyes darting across the room, desperate to find a lifeline among the council or the crowd. None offered one. The room had turned. Neighbors who had once nodded politely at her speeches now whispered behind their hands. A farmer in the front row muttered, "She sold it to her own mother?" and shook his head in disbelief. I moved one step closer, still calm, still steady. You wanted to erase me, I said softly, but loud enough for the hall to hear. You wanted the world to see a poor old woman too weak to fight back. Instead, you sold the land into my hands again. You thought you were clever. All you did was prove me right about the danger of pride. The handkerchief in my palm carried the weight of my husband's promise, my own vow to live quietly, yet not blindly. I held it up for a moment, not as a flag, but as a reminder. This lace has survived decades of storms. So have I. You underestimated both. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Ethan's phone, still recording, seemed to hang mute, capturing the raw collapse of a lie too big to sustain. The power reversal had begun, and every soul in that room knew it. The room held its breath. The documents lay on the council table like stones, heavy, undeniable. Marissa stared at them as if letters might rearrange and rescue her script. Then she turned on me, voice cracking through the microphone. You lied to me all my life. I did not answer. I took the lace handkerchief from my pocket and touched the corner of my eye. One small gesture, measured, clean. The cloth cooled my skin. I lowered my hand and kept standing, shoulders even, breath steady. The hall, noisy minutes before, shifted into a deeper quiet. People felt the distance between rage and restraint, and knew which ground was higher. Ethan tried to fill the silence. Everyone calm down, he said, raising his phone, lens hunting for an angle that could crop truth out of the frame. Marissa's eyes flashed. You hid everything, she said. You sat on a fortune and let me feel small. What kind of mother does that? I kept my gaze on her, present without heat. Behind her words lived years of quiet sacrifice, wax paper lunches, a patched winter coat, a spelling bee cake from pantry scraps. I had not lied. I had chosen a life where worth is not measured by shine. From the back row, Claire's voice carried just enough. She never lied. She just never needed to brag. The sentence moved through the room like a hand smoothing a wrinkled sheet. A few heads nodded. Someone exhaled. Marissa heard it. So secrecy is virtue now, she snapped. Maggie stepped forward slightly, but waited. I lifted the handkerchief again, not to hide tears, but to honor the quiet that had guarded my family. When I spoke, my tone was mild. I kept our company private because money changes the way people treat one another. I wanted you to learn the value of work before the weight of wealth, to know who you were without a figure after your name. She shook her head. You made me grow up feeling less than everyone else. Less is not the same as enough, I said. You had enough, Marissa. Food, shelter, school, a mother who showed up. You were not owed spectacle. A ripple moved through the rows. Not laughter, not scorn, simply understanding. Ethan lowered the phone a fraction. The council chair cleared his throat. Mrs. Moore, do you wish to add anything for the record? I shook my head. The documents speak. I will not argue with my child in public. The words settled like a boundary, chalked down the center of a road. Marissa gripped the podium. You embarrassed me, she said, voice fraying. You waited until I was exposed to humiliate me. I let silence answer. The clock above the doors clicked one patient second, then another. Power gathered in that stillness. It did not need to be declared. It simply was. Claire leaned toward the aisle, eyes bright. Dignity is not humiliation, she murmured. Maggie placed a final sheet on the table, the audit trail tying Westfield to Moore Agritech with plain signatures and dates. No flourish. Fact has its own voice. I turned my palms upward on the handkerchief and breathed. The scent of old wood, the faint bitterness of coffee left too long on a burner. The clean sting of paper. All of it anchored me to the present. I remembered my husband saying that arguments harvest only thistles when planted in public. Tonight, I would not plant what I did not want to reap. A teenager in the third row whispered, "She did not yell," to his mother. The woman nodded. She does not need to. Marissa's shoulders dropped slightly. Without the fuel of my outrage, her fire began to choke on its own smoke. She looked at Ethan. He looked away. I folded the handkerchief once, then again, edges aligned. The movement felt like sealing a letter. When I raised my eyes, the room had chosen where to stand. Not with triumph or jeering, with a steadiness that told me they recognized the shape of what had happened. A boundary had been restored in plain view. The chair addressed the hall. We will pause for 5 minutes. His gavel tapped once. Voices rose, hushed, urgent. Feet shuffled. Yet around me, a pocket of quiet held. Claire's hand brushed my sleeve. I am here, she said. I know, I answered. And still I did not look at my daughter with anger. I looked at her as if she were 8 again, lost in a store aisle, certain I had disappeared, when all along I stood one rack over, waiting for her to breathe and look up. Tonight, I chose not to disappear. I chose to be seen without shouting. The difference filled the room. When the gavel tapped again and the council reconvened, the air in the hall felt heavier, as if everyone carried a question they had not yet dared to speak aloud. The papers on the table had spoken clearly. My daughter's lies had been unmasked, and the land stood once more under my name. Yet the weight in the room was not just about deeds and signatures. It was about blood. It was about family. A man in the second row stood first, his cap in his hands. Mrs. Moore, he said, voice rough from years in the fields. What your daughter did was wrong. But she's still your kin. Doesn't blood count for something? Before I could answer, another woman spoke from across the aisle. Kin don't give them the right to steal. If it were anyone else, you'd call it theft, plain and simple. Family doesn't excuse betrayal. The hall stirred. Neighbors murmured, their voices weaving into a rough chorus. Some nodded at the farmer, others at the woman. The debate spread, not about the legality, Maggie's documents had ended that, but about the morality of a mother standing against her own child. I sat back, the lace handkerchief folded tight in my hand, and let the voices wash over me. In their words, I heard the questions they weren't asking directly. Could they imagine standing where I stood? Could they picture their own child turning on them with greed in their eyes? Would they fight? Would they forgive? My gaze lowered to the cloth in my palm. the threads worn but intact. I thought of the nights I had stitched clothes by lamplight, of the mornings I had risen before dawn to tend soil and cook meals. I had poured my love into Marissa in ways no ledger could ever tally. And yet she had called me a poor old woman, as if those years were nothing. In the quiet of my own heart, I spoke words no one else could hear. Forgiveness does not mean erasing what was done. Forgiveness means refusing to let the wound dictate the rest of your life. I can forgive her as my child, but I cannot pretend the harm never happened, and I will not allow it to happen again. The council chair cleared his throat. This is not only about contracts, he said carefully. It is also about the health of our community. Families carry weight here. Reconciliation matters. Maggie leaned closer and whispered, "You don't have to respond. The law is already on your side." But I knew silence now carried another burden. The room looked to me, not just as landowner, but as mother. I rose slowly, handkerchief in my palm, and spoke with the steadiness of someone who had considered these questions long before tonight. "I have heard your words," I began, "and I know some of you believe family means always forgiving. Others believe trust, once broken, must be guarded against forever. Perhaps both are true." The crowd hushed. Even Marissa, arms folded tight across her chest, stilled her restless tapping foot. "My daughter wronged me," I continued. "She betrayed the trust that built her childhood, her education, her home. But I am her mother. My love does not vanish. Still, love is not a free pass for cruelty. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Forgiveness means I will not let this wound define who I am. It means I will not spend my remaining days chained to bitterness." I paused, the weight of my words sinking in. But forgiveness does not mean returning the keys to someone who has already broken into the house. Forgiveness can live in the heart, while boundaries live in the world. A murmur rose again, softer this time. Some nodded, others frowned, still wrestling with the tension. One man muttered, "Family is family. You forgive, you move on." Another woman countered, "If family steals from you, you protect yourself. You still love them, but you don't hand them another chance to rob you blind." The council chair rubbed his temple. "This community values both justice and compassion. Perhaps we are watching both at work." I lowered my eyes to the handkerchief once more, pressing it against my palm. Inside me, sorrow and strength braided together. I knew the line I would walk. I would forgive Marissa as my daughter, but I would not give her the power to wound me again. I looked up and spoke to the room. "Each of you will leave tonight with your own opinion. Some of you will judge me harshly, others will understand. That is as it should be. But know this: justice does not erase mercy, and mercy does not erase justice. Both can exist, even in the same heart." The words lingered in the hall, and for the first time since the meeting began, the voices quieted not because of shock, but because of thought. They would carry this question home, into their kitchens and porches, into their own reckonings with family. And that was as it should be. In the weeks that followed, the town returned to its rhythms, but nothing felt quite the same. The headlines traveled faster than any harvest story ever had. Local papers carried it first, then regional stations, then even a national outlet. One title struck me most: "Poor Old Woman, Rich in Silence." They told the story of how a widow, thought to be powerless, revealed herself as the majority owner of a multi-million-dollar company. Strangers debated my choices as if they knew me. Some praised me for patience. Others wondered if I had been too quiet for too long. The council announced their decision quickly. The Anderson Commons project was canceled. Contracts were unwound. Funds returned to more agritech. What Marissa and Ethan had paraded as their triumph dissolved into paper dust. Investors demanded reimbursement. Fees piled high. The couple who had flaunted champagne on tropical sands now faced creditors at their door. I read none of this with glee. I sat on my porch, the lace handkerchief resting in my lap, and listened to the rustle of cornfields instead. Consequences are not celebrations. They are the steady balancing of scales. Ethan resigned from his job at the bank. Whether he jumped or was pushed, I never asked. His colleagues no longer trusted him with clients' accounts. Marissa tried to salvage her image, but reputation is fragile once cracked. Invitations stopped arriving. The very people who had clapped for her presentation avoided her at the market. She walked the aisles, as if the fluorescent lights themselves whispered reminders. Neighbors did not gloat. They spoke quietly, with a kind of sorrow. At the diner, I overheard one man say, "She thought she was building a mall. She lost her name instead." Another replied, "Pride always costs more than the invoice." Claire came by one evening with soup, as she often did. She set it on my table and sighed. "I don't think anyone takes pleasure in what happened, Lillian. They just see it as what must come when truth is ignored." I nodded. That is enough. Sometimes I thought of Marissa as a child again, bare feet in the dirt, laughter chasing fireflies. How had that girl hardened into someone who could sign away her mother's home? I forgave her in my heart, but forgiveness did not erase the sight of bulldozers or the sound of her calling me a poor old woman. Those echoes lingered, though they lost their sting with each passing dawn. The media tried to make me a symbol. They asked for interviews, photos, a chance to pose me in front of roses or ledgers. I declined. My life was not a spectacle. My silence had not been for fame. It had been for survival, for dignity. I would not trade one kind of noise for another. Maggie handled the legal details. She came by with folders, updates, signatures that required my pen. She spoke with the same sharp precision as always. But once, when she thought I wasn't looking, I saw her brush a tear from her eye. "I don't often see justice settle this cleanly," she admitted, "but it feels fair." I thought about that word. Fair. It did not feel like victory. It felt like a return to balance, the way a tree rights itself after a storm bends it low. The branches may not look the same, but they still reach for light. Ethan disappeared from public view. His social media pages went dark, his live streams gone. Marissa lingered, trying to rebuild, but each attempt faltered. A friend told me she tried to volunteer for a civic committee and was turned away. "Not after what you did to your mother," they said. Her face, once polished with confidence, now carried shadows under her eyes. I did not gloat. I did not smile at her downfall. I simply noted it as part of the natural unfolding. Choices write their own sentences. On a Sunday morning, as church bells rang in the distance, I sat in my kitchen with the paper folded neatly beside me. The headline once more called me the silent rich woman. I touched the handkerchief, tracing the lace. Wealth had never been my identity. Silence had never been weakness. Both had been tools, used when needed, put away when not. And so the town moved forward, without a mall, without the illusion my daughter had built. Life carried on with chores, planting, children laughing in schoolyards. The balance restored itself, not with celebration, but with steadiness. No one cheered at the downfall. No one needed to. The truth had spoken, and that was enough. The garden had begun to recover by late summer. New shoots pressed their way through soil once torn by bulldozers. Roses are stubborn that way, fragile to touch, yet fierce in their insistence on returning. I set a wooden chair among them and lowered myself carefully, the lace handkerchief folded in my lap. The air carried the scent of blossoms, mingled with the faint tang of earth still healing. I closed my eyes and listened to the quiet hum of bees drifting from bloom to bloom. This was the same space where I had once knelt with Marissa, showing her how to prune carefully so the plant would bloom stronger next season. She had laughed then, dirt smudging her cheek. That memory hurt now, but it also glowed, reminding me that love had once lived here before pride grew taller than roots. The handkerchief slipped through my fingers, its fabric soft from decades of use. I lifted it, pressing the edge against my palm. It was not tears I wiped, but memory itself, the ache of what had been given, the sorrow of what had been squandered. My voice came slow, steady, as if I were speaking to the roses themselves. I am not happy that my daughter failed. There is no victory in watching your own flesh stumble. What I feel is sadness, that she did not learn what love was trying to teach her. The words lingered in the air. A breeze lifted the petals around me, scattering them across the grass like notes of a hymn. I thought of all the years I had chosen silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because love sometimes speaks best in deeds, not in speeches. And yet Marissa had mistaken quiet for weakness. That wound cut deeper than the sale of the land ever could. I leaned back and let the chair creak beneath me, my gaze on the roses swaying gently in the wind. Each thorn glinted in the light, a reminder that beauty and pain are not opposites, but companions. We learn from both. My thoughts turned inward. Forgiveness is not forgetting, I told myself again. It is simply choosing not to let the wound steer the rest of your steps. I could walk in this garden without bitterness. I could breathe without rehearsing her insults. That was freedom, not hers, but mine. Some neighbors still came by with kind words. Others whispered that I had been too hard, that family should mean endless chances. I did not argue. I only smiled faintly and returned to the soil, because the soil never lies. You plant with care, and what grows reflects the truth of your hands. As I sat in the garden, I let the slowness of the moment settle over me. This was the pivot, the turn from conflict to quiet, from storm to stillness. I wanted the audience of my life, visible and unseen, to feel it. The hush after confrontation, the tender ache of a heart that has chosen dignity over revenge. The sun dipped lower, bathing the roses in a golden wash. Shadows lengthened across the yard, soft and forgiving. I held the handkerchief close to my heart, whispering to myself, "You survived, Lillian. You survived the storm, and you remain, tears welled but did not fall. They hovered, like the memory of rain after drought. I let them rest there, not ashamed, not hidden. My daughter might never return with apologies. She might never see the harm she caused. But here, in this garden, I knew who I was, and I knew what I had chosen. I bent forward, touched the soil, and let the earth stain my fingertips. That touch anchored me more than any fortune ever could. Wealth could be counted in numbers. Love could not. Loss could not. The measure of life was in moments like this, quiet, unadorned, yet full of truth. "I am not glad she fell," I whispered again, slower this time, as though carving the words into air. "I am only sorrowful she did not rise where love had lifted her." The garden swayed in answer, a soft choir of petals and stems. And in that moment, I let the silence carry me, not as emptiness, but as balm. It was the kind of silence that heals. The morning I signed the papers to establish the Moore Scholarship Fund, the roses were beginning to open, buds loosening into color as if the garden understood the work of unfolding. Maggie sat across from me at the kitchen table, reading every clause, every promise we were making to children. I held the lace handkerchief in my left hand while I signed with my right, ink drying into a vow. We designed the fund with simple rules. It would send farm kids to study soil science, agricultural engineering, horticulture, and rural business, with an expectation they would bring knowledge back to communities like ours. Tuition, books, travel, a small stipend for boots and winter coats. We wrote it all in. Dignity is often hidden in the cost of getting there. When the last page slid into the folder, Maggie closed the clips and looked at me with a softness I had not seen since my husband's funeral. "Some losses open a road to hope," she said. The sentence did not promise that pain disappears. It suggested pain could be repurposed. I nodded. The roses outside nodded in a breeze. Word traveled quickly through the county schools. A guidance counselor called to ask if I would visit the high school's agriculture lab. I said yes. I arrived in my work jacket. Students gathered around tables where seedlings pushed through trays under fluorescent lights. Notebooks lay open, pencils smudged, eagerness bright as morning. I told them I was a farmer, that a good sensor in the ground can save a field in August, that spreadsheets can keep a farm from bleeding in February. I told them I was also a quiet owner of a company that built tools for farmers, born from two people who believed the future belongs to those who respect the past. They listened without looking at their phones. You can still feel reverence in a room when it happens. Claire arrived at the school door near the end of the period. With her was her granddaughter, June, small and serious, a braid down her back and mud on her shoes from feeding goats before class. Claire squeezed my hand. "She wants to apply," she whispered. June held her folder like a passport. Inside were grades, a summer plan for a pollinator garden, and a letter describing how she wanted to make soil healthier on rented land her family tended. We sat together on a bench near the greenhouse. June asked if a person from a trailer behind the feed store could count as a scholar. I told her scholars are born every time. Curiosity refuses to sit down. I told her the fund was built for hands like hers. The bell rang. Students flowed around us carrying textbooks and seed trays. A poster on the wall showed crop rotations. A whiteboard listed soil textures by feel. I felt the same steadiness that had filled me on the night of the council meeting. Not triumph, not vindication, but alignment. The future was not a mall. It was a room where a teenager traced root hairs with a pencil and gasped at their design. Back at the farmhouse, we launched the application portal from Maggie's laptop. Claire made coffee. I arranged envelopes. Sunlight cut the kitchen in two like a bright path. We read the first submissions that afternoon. A boy who repaired tractors after school. A girl who mapped water runoff behind a church. Siblings who wanted to build a hoop house for winter greens. Their sentences were plain. Their ambition was not. I thought of Marissa's old pictures, the ones with champagne and curated sunsets. Then I looked at photographs attached to these applications. Calloused hands lifting seedlings, a barn roof patched with tin, a library card worn at the edges. The contrast did not make me bitter. It clarified what matters. When the first acceptance letters were printed, I folded each one with the same care I used to fold the handkerchief. Crease to crease, promise to promise. We drove to the post office at dusk. Maggie locked the box. Claire slid the envelopes into the slot. I whispered a blessing I learned from my grandmother. May their studies be hard, and may they never be without help. On the drive home, Maggie rolled down her window and let cool air in. "You created a path," she said. "You did not build walls with your pain." I watched the fields darken and felt the steady tug of purpose. Pain had found its work. The porch light welcomed us. I set the handkerchief on the table beside a stack of blank notebooks we would donate to the AG class. Tomorrow the soil would need watering. Tomorrow the mailbox would hold questions. Tomorrow, Hope would arrive wearing work boots. The last chapter of this story does not unfold in a courtroom or a council meeting. It unfolds in the quiet of my kitchen. The roses outside have begun to shed their petals, drifting onto the soil that once carried 4 generations of footsteps. I sit at the same oak table where I taught Marissa her alphabet, where Ethan once asked me if I had any advice for a man about to marry my daughter. The lace handkerchief lies in front of me, folded, catching a bar of sunlight through the window. I hold it gently. It has dried tears, covered a trembling mouth, and today it becomes the last page of a lesson I never wanted to teach. People keep asking me if I will forgive. They whisper it in the grocery store, send letters, stop me outside the church. The word forgiveness rolls around like a stone, heavy, unavoidable. So let me say it now, in my own voice. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is not a pardon slip handed out for betrayal. Forgiveness is choosing to walk forward without carrying the weight of the stone in your pocket. When I say I forgive my daughter, I do not erase the papers she forged, the soil she sold, or the words she spit at me when I was lying in a hospital bed. I do not forget that she called me a poor old woman. What I do is refuse to carry those words into tomorrow. They will not shape my spine. They will not dictate the bend of my shoulders. I set them down, like a farmer sets down a heavy sack at dusk, and I leave them where they fall. Some of you will disagree. You will say family must be cut off when it poisons its roots. Others will say blood is too deep to sever. Perhaps both are right. My choice is somewhere in between. I do not invite Marissa into my home tonight, but I do not wish her ruin either. Her ruin will arrive without my help, carried by the echo of her own decisions. My role is to let the echo fade, to plant new seeds where the silence finally settles. Claire came by yesterday with her granddaughter, June. She placed a jar of jam on my counter and whispered that the scholarship letter had arrived. June read it 3 times, then hugged the paper like a child hugs a pillow. That picture is the one I keep in my heart, not the image of Marissa clinking glasses over ocean waves. If pain built the scholarship, then maybe hope is worth the scar. I walk to the window. The handkerchief remains on the table, lit by gold light. My reflection overlaps with the garden outside, roses mixing with lines of my face. I whisper to myself, almost as a prayer, forgiveness is not forgetting. It is choosing to walk forward without carrying the weight. The sentence feels final and freeing at once. If you were me, would you forgive? Would you let silence be your answer, or would you demand an apology? Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what forgiveness has meant in your own life. We are not alone in these questions. Somewhere, someone else is wondering if they should carry the stone or set it down. The handkerchief glows in the sunlight. For years it was just cloth. Today it is proof that something fragile can endure the roughest hands. So can we.